If, like me, you have finished Baldur's Gate 3 and you need something else to play alongside Baldur's Gate 3, because, let's be fair, none of us have stopped playing that yet. But I think I found the solution, and it is V Rising. Now, I was very kindly gifted this game by Stunlock Studios, so a big thank you to them. And I want to break down a few little tips and tricks you should do before you play this game. So, let's jump in. And the first thing we are going to mention is, if you want to play this solo, you can. And here's how you do it. You're going to hit play game and do a private game. Now, this will work and it's just your world. From here, you can obviously enter your password, you can name it, all your normal settings, your advanced game settings, all that nice stuff. But this doesn't mean it has to be purely solo. This is essentially your own private server. And what it means is if you want friends to join you, they can. But it is purely your world. So single player game, this is how I'm playing, and I'm doing it all solo. But bear in mind, if you do invite friends to come and join you, once you quit the game, unlike a actual multiplayer server, you will kick them out of the game too. So bear that in mind. But that is my first little tip for this game. If you like the look of it, but you're worried it's purely a multiplayer experience, it's not. You can play solo, and this is how you do it. I will pivot though and say the game itself does feel more like a multiplayer game, in my opinion, but I've been playing it solo. I'm not a big multiplayer fan, and I've been having a hell of a good time with it. Okay, now when it comes to the game, my second tip, and I think this is a must you have to do as soon as you start. Now, the control system uses W, A, S, and D to move, much like most PC games. However, when it comes to picking up loot, like with the F button, or using your spells with the R, you end up doing some sort of weird things with your hand, and it can be pretty difficult. So, go options, we're going to come into here, we're going to go to our controls and our key bindings, and we're going to bind auto run. Bind into any key you want. I have mine on my mouse buttons. And essentially what I'm going to do now, hand is off the keyboard, you can't see, but my hand is off the keyboard, and then we can press one button and we will automatically run, which means all we have to worry about now is changing the camera with the left mouse button, or the right mouse button I should say. I'm a console player, please bear with me. But this makes things so much easier, because if you don't do this, especially in combat, I have a real struggle trying to fight things while also worrying about moving and stuff. And doing WSD, it makes it a bit more tricky, whereas if I just hold this, now I'm like this, I can easily hit my R key, I can throw my spells up, I can attack. Nice and simple. Just like that. Really, really easy way of playing the game. Now, tip number 2 when it comes to this game, and in my opinion this is one of the biggest ones. Explore slowly and explore everywhere. The map is big. Very, very big, as you can see here. Explore as much as you can, but nice and slow. There are going to be many little caves and dens and resources hidden everywhere. Make sure you're exploring nice and slow so you don't miss anything, so you don't have to double back on yourself. Try and take as much loot as you can, obviously without being too encumbered. And yeah, really take your time in exploring this lovely world. As you can see, I am in this save file, only this much into it, and there's still so much to go. The map is a lot bigger than you'd think. I know here it looks really small, but it is much, much bigger than you would think. Now, my next tip while we have the map open is these little circles are actually regions that you can visit. And what's most important here is each one will tell you what you can find inside. Now, the game itself has a really neat and pretty thorough crafting system, and that's how you level up your gear and stuff. I'm not going to spoil too much about the beginning of the game. There's not much of a story so far to the game, from what I can tell. But crafting is one of the most important aspects of this game. So, using these little regions, being able to tell you what you can find here. For example, if you need copper, we'd come up to the bandit copper camp. If we want... let's find something. There you go. If we need morning lily, we know we can come to the infested cemetery down here. For example, there's a cave there. We've got hide, which we can find in the wolf den here. You know, merchants are here. Everything is mapped out. It even maps out where you dropped your loot once you die. So try and plan out what you need for crafting wise. For example, I think one of the next things I need are leather hide and rough hide. So I'm going to be coming down to the wolf den to be able to source this, to craft more items, to level up my vampire, to then go out into the world and do it again. It's a very... My way of describing the game was very much, it's like Diablo meets Minecraft with vampires, which I know sounds really wacky, but it'll make more sense if you play the game. But make sure you utilise your map and make sure you know exactly where your resources are that you need. Okay, my next tip for V Rising will be to make sure you check your build menu. This is where you find all your, basically, items or like resources you need for your castle, because you get to build your own castle, which is really cool. Now, the reason I say to check your build menu is because some of these, so far than what I've seen, you don't actually have a quest to build. However, they are needed in terms of unlocking better gear. For example, I was not quested to make the furnace, but I had to make the furnace to be able to get copper weapons, to be able to level up my gear level. So it's just small little things like that. So make sure you're sort of checking what resources you need and then checking your build menu, because 9 times out of 10, the resource you need next, you already have the means to be able to make. You just need to actually get the tools in place by placing a furnace or placing a tannery, that sort of thing. So if you are a little stuck, check your build menu, find out what you need, find out how you make it, and you'll probably already have the option to be able to do it. You just need to place the buildings down, like I said. Now, when it comes to buildings, again, we have lots of good options, and they are upgradable. So if we come into our sawmill, by upgradable, what I mean is here. So if you have a matching floor, it reduces the cost of all the materials you need. So the flooring you use will affect the buildings you have, much like whether or not they have walls. So if you have a wall and ceiling on this sawmill, we get an increased amount in production. So another thing to bear in mind is if you are going to do this, it might be worth encasing these buildings ASAP to really maximize your resource materials. As you can see, I haven't bothered. It's not an essential one, but it is something to bear in mind. If you want to be able to have a very efficient and like narrowed down system to getting your resource items, just encase them in a building, have a nice little fun layout. I personally suck at that part of the game. I am not the most creative when it comes to designs like this. In things like Minecraft, I suck. Things like The Sims, I can never build houses, that type of thing. But build some simple rooms, place these in there, and then you'll get the buffs that you want. Okay, now this one might sound very, very silly. However, it took me longer than it should have to discover this. And that is breaking down these materials, these like resources to get materials. Now, we have some stone here. So if we just hit this, we're doing about 4 per hit. However, if you use the correct tool for the job, you'll get more. And there you go, we're now doing 7 per hit. So make sure you're using the right tool for the job to speed up your process of grinding out these materials. Now, it's not a big difference as you saw, but when you're trying to farm 400 stone, it can speed up quite significantly, I won't lie. This was something that I was very ashamed to have not discovered sooner, but I'm very glad I did. And that leads us very nicely to this area here. Now, some of the resources you need upgraded tools to be able to harvest. For example, if I hit this with a with a wooden mace, I'm not going to break it. I have a reinforced bone mace, and therefore I can now loot it, and I can get some copper ore. Just like this. And as you can see, you get a lot more out of these, and they break, and they take longer to break, I should say. However, because I'm only on like the second tier of items in this save, there are lots of resources I still can't harvest. And apparently tree people, who I've not had that happen to before. How hard are these guys? Very. Okay, now that it's daytime, this actually brings me to my next tip, and this is one that, if you don't know anything about the game, You might not realise, and if you do, it will sound pretty obvious, but be careful of the sun. It hurts. Like a lot. And you can really, really die quickly if you stand in the sun for too long. So avoid that as best you can. That was something I did not realise going into the game, because I played this completely blind, and then I started melting. There's lots of shade in the game. You can still go out during the day and find things, loot things, but it does mean you have to be a bit more tactical when it comes to like the boss fights, because a lot of the bosses are going to be in open spaces, and there's pretty much no shade. So please bear that in mind. Okay, now again, this will be for any of you PC newbies such as myself, and it's a tip that I wish I knew a lot sooner, but it's going to sound really stupid. When it comes to attacking, breaking resources, that sort of thing, like this tree, you don't have to constantly click the button like I am now. You can hold it down and you will just auto-attack. It might sound really stupid for a lot of PC people, but as me, as a console player, that was something I wish I knew sooner. I was furiously clicking my mouse for about 3 hours playing this, and I wish I knew. What you'll also have seen is, as we broke the tree, we lost the shade, which is another nice little tip. So, despite the fact how much shade there is in the game, you can break it, as you'll see here. Now, this means you have to then do a toss-up between what is more important. Do you want these resources, or are we going to hang tight and try and save it until nighttime? Yeah, as you can see there, we are stuck in the sun now because we destroyed the shade. So another thing to bear in mind, if you're in a very open area, you might not want to loot it, or sorry, you might not want to harvest it for resources, because you might end up in a situation where you're going to end up dying really, really quick. Okay, my next tip for this game is your gear level is the most important thing in this game, in my opinion. The gear level is essentially your character level. The higher the gear level, the better you do against enemies, the better you do against bosses, that type of thing. Now when it comes to the stats in the game, everything is percentage based. So for example, we are gear level 20. And if I was to come in here and to look at the bosses you can get throughout the game, I'm not going to ruin as we go up, but it will tell you how well you match up against them. So for example, against Alpha the White Wolf, the first main boss in the game, it's level 16. We're currently level 20, so we're 4 gear levels lower than it. Oh, sorry, it's 4 gear levels lower than us. The next set of bosses are the ones here. And you can see here, level 20, we are matched, which means we do equal amounts of damage and take equal amounts of damage. If we were to come up here, we have Grayson the Armourer, and we are 7 levels lower than them. And why this is important is that for each level you are lower, you deal less damage and take more damage. So, for example, if you are 7 levels lower, as you can see here, you will take more and deal less than if you were 6 or 5 or 3. If you are higher, for example, if we now fought the Alpha Wolf, we'd actually do an extended amount of damage and take less damage because our gear level is higher. It's all percentage based. I think the number is 4% per level. So for example, we'd be matched here, whereas here we would be 16%, or deal 16% more damage and take 16% less. If we would come up to here, for example, we'd actually take 28% more damage and deal 28% less damage. So you really want to go into these fights at least level. Honestly, you're probably a little higher. For example, in this save I've just been going through, I'm trying to take on Keely the Frost Archer, and I am getting my arse handed to me a lot. So bear that in mind. Your gear level, you probably want it to be 3 or 4 higher if possible, to really maximize your chances of being able to handle the bosses, especially if you're playing solo, because you don't have your teammates there to back you up. So if that's the case, go out, grind out some resources, have some fun, and then try and tackle these bosses. Now while we're talking about gear levels and stuff like that, this brings us very nicely to our attributes. And we have our physical power and our spell power. So for example, our spell power is 17, and our physical power is 20. So if we look at this, you'll see attributes, it is plus 8.5 physical power. If I unequipped it, we have now gone up to 22.4. So you'll see here, each one we equipped, as we go through, changes our physical power S. For example, the spear, we only done 13. But, back to our sword, 24. And our gear level changes based on what we have equipped, as you'll see at the top. For example, our copper sword is our highest level item. If I switch to that, we've gone down 3 levels. So again, something to bear in mind. And that also ties into our actual magic spells. So as you can see here, we have Shadow Bolt. Launch a projectile that deals 185 magic damage and inflicts leech. Now why is that important? That is important because 185 damage is based on this. So for example, we're going to be doing about 30 spell power damage with that spell. If it did 50%, we'd only be dealing 8.5 spell power damage. So really try and fine craft your spells like that. It's a very percentage based heavy game. It's not overwhelming though, so please bear that in mind. It's no different from most RPGs or Diablo-esque games where higher spell power, the higher physical power, the higher your gear, the more damage you're going to do, the more output you're going to have. Very simple formula. It looks a bit more complicated, but it's really not, I promise. Well worth dipping into it. Trust me on that one. Now we also have blood pools and blood types. So, when you get to the part of the game, you can actually siphon the enemy's life force. And depending on the enemy you siphon, we'll debate on which blood pool you have. For example, the last one I siphoned was a warrior. And that gives us things like this. For example, 10 to 15% physical power. So the more blood you have in your blood pool, the higher you go up these tiers, and the more effects you unlock. Now, that's based on your blood quality. If I was to go out and I was to siphon the blood from a rogue, for example, I would have rogue blood type, and I believe tier 1 for that is your critical chance. So as you're going through the game, and you might be lacking in certain aspects when it comes to certain enemies, play around with your blood pool types. There's multiple other guides about this. I'm not going to dip into it too much, because I think my next tip is the key one for this game. But it's worth noting, go out, siphon as much blood as you can, get your blood quality up as high as you can, and really choose a blood type that fits the kind of build and character you want. So with all this being said, that does lead me very nicely into my final tip for playing V Rising. And it's actually a bit of a weird one if you've gotten to the end of the video. My final tip is dip into this game knowing as little as possible. Now, I've just given you guys a bunch of tips and tricks. I've deliberately avoided telling you a few things, I've deliberately avoided going too in depth, and I've deliberately given you some really sort of like quality of life tips, because in my opinion, V Rising is the kind of game that you need to go into as blind as possible, have a feel for it, sort of play around, die a few times, and then jump back in, and then once you've sort of figured a few things out yourself, then seek out some more guides. You know, have a look at a guide that's a bit more just purely focused on your blood type. Have a look at a guide that's purely focused on your spells. Then go and find like a build guide for a frost, blood, vampire, or whatever. But really jump into this game. Experience it for yourself first before you do anything. And then see what sort of things you need to figure out on top. This is a game that I think once you've got the basics of it, you should go and watch some videos of people that have figured it out and have a better understanding to really fine-tune your gameplay and give you more enjoyment out of the game ASAP, because there is a lot to learn, I won't lie. But it's thoroughly enjoyable. But I do think that is the key thing with this. I think you have to jump into this game knowing nothing, reading the menus, figuring things out, just having a little play around with the basic spells and basic resources and like crafting and just killing a few little enemies, taking on the first boss. And I think once you defeat the first boss, the Alpha the White Wolf, then go out and find some guides and, you know, really narrow things down, learn more about the game, and watch yourself be more comfortable, watch your character be more powerful, and overall, just rule the night with your Vampire Lord. So again, I need to give a big thanks to Stunlock Studios for gifting me this game. I am going to be doing a Let's Play of it. I'm going to be doing more guides as well, because I do really enjoy this game. I'm not a big multiplayer guy, hence why I'm doing solo. and I'm not a big Diablo-esque person. Now, there's probably better ways to describe this game, and I'm sure someone will let me know in the comments below. But yeah, to me, it feels like a slightly Diablo-esque game, coupled with the Minecraft like resources and crafting, and just with a huge vampire sticker. And honestly, it works so well. So, if you've enjoyed, please drop this a like. Helps me amazingly. If you're new and you're not subscribed but you'd like to, that'd also be amazing. And hopefully, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.